Hello, dear traveller. Welcome to this quiet corner of the evening, where stories unfold like petals in moonlight, where mysteries wait with gentle patience, and where sleep comes softly, carried on words that drift and settle like snowflakes upon ancient cobblestones. Tonight, we journey together into a world of flickering gas lamps and whispered secrets, where the great detective Sherlock Holmes encounters a puzzle wrapped in the velvet darkness of winter. A mystery designed not to startle or frighten, but to guide your thoughts into peaceful contemplation as you surrender to rest. This story exists for you, specifically for this moment when the day releases its hold and night opens its welcoming arms. There is no urgency here, no demand upon your attention beyond what feels comfortable. Allow your breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Let your body find its perfect position among the pillows and blankets that surround you. Perhaps you've travelled far today, through responsibilities and conversations, through the bright noise of waking hours. Here, in this space we create together, all of that fades into gentle distance. I wonder, as you listen, where you find yourself tonight. What corner of the world holds you as these words reach your ears? Are you in a place where rain taps against window panes, or where silence stretches vast and still? Whatever landscape surrounds you, we shall journey elsewhere together, to a London wrapped in January mist, where mysteries wait with the patience of centuries. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe with me as we begin. The year was 1889, and winter had draped itself across London like a theatre curtain of deepest grey, softening every edge, muffling every sound. Our story commences on the evening of the 5th of January, that peculiar span of days when Christmas decorations begin to look tired rather than festive, when the promise of a new year feels both fresh and uncertain. The lodgings at 201B Baker Street glowed with particular warmth on this evening, the windows appearing as amber squares against the gathering dusk, beacons of comfort in the encroaching darkness. Within those familiar rooms, a fire crackled in the hearth with that specific sound that seems to speak in consonants and vowels of its own invention. The soft collapse of burning wood, the whisper of flame consuming paper, the gentle settling of coals into new configurations. Sherlock Holmes occupied his preferred armchair, the leather worn to perfect suppleness by years of use, positioned at an angle that allowed him to observe both the fire and the rain-streaked window with equal facility. His long fingers were steepled beneath his chin, his grey eyes fixed upon some distant point that existed more in thought than in physical space. I sat across from him in my own chair, a book open upon my lap, though I confess the words upon the page had ceased to register some minutes earlier. There is a particular quality to evening silence shared between old friends. Not empty, but full, not absent, but present in ways that conversation sometimes cannot achieve. The rain outside provided a constant, soothing percussion, thousands upon thousands of droplets finding their way earthward, transforming the city into something softer, more forgiving than its daytime aspect. The room around us held the accumulated comfort of years. The gaslight burned with steady yellow warmth, casting shadows that moved with languorous grace across the wallpaper's familiar pattern. The air carried the scent of Holmes's tobacco, a particular Turkish blend he favoured during winter months, mingled with the smell of old books, leather, coal smoke, and the faint ghost of Mrs. Hudson's excellent cooking rising from below. On the mantelpiece, the clock ticked with metronomic precision, marking time's passage without urgency. January, Holmes murmured suddenly, his voice barely rising above the rain's whisper, is a month of peculiar melancholy, Watson. The festivities have concluded, the decorations come down, and yet winter persists, stretching ahead with no promise of immediate relief. Humanity finds itself in a kind of suspended state, no longer celebrating, not yet renewed. I smiled slightly, recognizing one of my friend's philosophical moods. And yet, I offered gently, it has its own beauty, the quietness, perhaps, the permission to rest after celebration's demands. Holmes responded, a sound of neither agreement nor disagreement, but acknowledgement. His gaze remained fixed upon the middle distance, his mind clearly occupied with thoughts he had not yet chosen to articulate. The fire popped softly, sending a small shower of sparks upward into the chimney. Outside, a hansom cab passed in the street below, the horses' hooves making that particular hollow sound they produce on wet cobblestones, a clip-clop rhythm that seemed to belong to dreams more than waking life. The vehicle's lamp swung gently, sending brief, sweeping illumination across our window, before continuing on into the misty darkness. Time stretched in that comfortable way it sometimes does when there is nowhere else to be, nothing pressing that demands attention. I found myself watching the shadows dance across the ceiling, following their movements with the kind of absent fascination that precedes sleep. The warmth of the fire reached across the room in waves, each more soothing than the last, inviting a drowsiness that felt earned after the day's activities. Then, cutting through the evening's tranquility with the delicacy of a knife through silk, came the sound of the doorbell below. Not a harsh jangle, but a measured ring that somehow suggested the caller possessed both urgency and breeding in equal measure. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps could be heard ascending from the kitchen, her familiar tread upon the stairs, followed by the opening of the street door and a brief, muffled exchange of voices, too quiet to distinguish. Holmes's eyes, which had been distant, suddenly focused with that peculiar intensity he brought to moments of interest. He did not move otherwise, but every fibre of his being seemed to shift from repose to attention, like an instrument brought into tune. A visitor, he observed quietly, and at this hour, in this weather, someone for whom ordinary visiting hours mean nothing, or someone for whom urgency overrides social convention. Should we receive them? I asked, already knowing the answer, already feeling the story's gentle pull away from quiet contemplation, and toward whatever mystery waited below. I believe, Holmes replied, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been anticipation, that we shall have little choice. Mrs. Hudson is already showing them up. Indeed, footsteps were ascending our 17 stairs, one set light and familiar, belonging to our landlady, the other heavier, measured, suggesting a person of considerable height and deliberate movement. There came a soft knock upon our door, and Mrs. Hudson entered, her kind face carrying an expression of mild concern. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said softly. "A gentleman to see you, a Lord Ashbourne. He apologizes for the hour, but says the matter is of some delicacy." She stepped aside, revealing our visitor. Lord Ashbourne was a man of perhaps 60 years, tall and distinguished, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead, and the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and sorrow. He wore a dark coat beaded with rain, and carried a walking stick of polished ebony topped with silver. His eyes, a pale blue, held an expression of troubled thoughtfulness. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice a cultured baritone that barely rose above conversation level. "Dr. Watson, I apologize profoundly for this intrusion. I have spent the past several hours debating whether to come, walking through the rain, attempting to convince myself that my concerns are merely the products of an overactive imagination. And yet, here I stand, unable to dismiss what I have witnessed, unable to find rest without seeking your counsel." Holmes rose from his chair with fluid grace, gesturing toward the seat he had just vacated. "Please, Lord Ashbourne, sit by the fire. Mrs. Hudson, might we impose upon you for tea? The night is cold, and our guest has been walking in the rain." He turned to our visitor with a slight smile. "You have not come by carriage, despite your evident means. You wish to think, to process, to arrive at certainty before presenting your case." A flicker of surprise crossed Ashbourne's features. "Indeed, your reputation for observation is well earned, sir." As Mrs. Hudson departed to prepare tea, Holmes settled into my chair while I took up a position standing near the fireplace, notebook in hand. A configuration we had assumed countless times before, so familiar it required no discussion. The room rearranged itself around this new purpose, becoming a consulting room rather than a place of quiet evening repose, though the atmosphere remained gentle, conducive to confidences. Lord Ashbourne lowered himself into the offered chair, his movements careful, as though his body carried more than merely physical weight. He set his walking stick aside and removed his gloves with slow deliberation, the firelight catching the gold signet ring upon his right hand. For a long moment he simply stared into the flames, gathering his thoughts like a man collecting scattered papers after a gust of wind. "It concerns my ancestral home," he began at length, his voice taking on the quality of someone reciting from memory, from a place deep within. "Ashbourne Hall in Northumberland, a place that has belonged to my family since the 15th century, through wars and plagues, through the rise and fall of monarchs, through transformations both gradual and sudden. It stands upon a hillock overlooking the North Sea, surrounded by ancient woodlands, a place of considerable beauty and equal melancholy." He paused as Mrs. Hudson returned with the tea service, setting it upon the low table with quiet efficiency before withdrawing once more. The sound of tea being poured, that gentle cascade of liquid into porcelain, provided a moment of domestic normalcy, a brief respite before the story continued. Holmes prepared 3 cups with practiced ease, handing one to our guest and another to me before taking up his own. The steam rose in delicate spirals, carrying the scent of bergamot and distant mountainsides. Lord Ashbourne wrapped both hands around the cup, as though drawing warmth from it into some cold place within himself. "The hall has always possessed peculiarities," he continued, his gaze returning to the fire. "Old houses do, I think. Sounds that suggest footsteps where no one walks. Draughts that move through rooms like invisible presences. Shadows that seem, in certain lights, to hold shapes they ought not possess. These things I have long dismissed as the natural consequence of ancient architecture, of settling stone and shifting wood, of imagination encountering darkness." The rain outside intensified slightly, a soft drumming that wrapped around the house like an additional layer of insulation from the outside world. Holmes sipped his tea, his eyes never leaving our visitor's face, reading in every line and gesture information that remained invisible to ordinary observers. However, Lord Ashburn's voice dropped even lower, becoming almost conspiratorial. What I have witnessed these past 12 nights transcends the merely atmospheric. It began on Christmas Eve, and has continued without fail each evening since. At precisely midnight, as measured by the great clock in the entrance hall, a timepiece of exceptional accuracy, I might add, a light appears in the eastern tower. Not the steady glow of a lamp or candle, but something that pulses, that seems to breathe, that casts illumination in shades I cannot quite describe. Blue, perhaps, but not any blue that exists in nature. Silver, but moving, alive. He set down his cup, his hands trembling slightly. I have investigated, of course. The Eastern Tower has been sealed for 30 years, since my father's time. The door is locked, the key kept in my personal possession. And yet, the light appears. Furthermore, on the night of Twelfth Night, which approaches in 2 days' time, family tradition speaks of something called the Revelation. My father mentioned it once, in his final illness, speaking of things that made little sense. He urged me to be present at the hall for Twelfth Night, to witness what he called the turning of the mystery. He died before he could explain further. Holmes had set aside his tea and assumed his characteristic posture of intense concentration, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. "This tower," he murmured. "Describe its history. When was it built? For what purpose? And why was it sealed?" "The Eastern Tower predates the main house," Lord Ashbourne replied, clearly grateful to focus on factual matters. "It was part of an earlier structure, possibly monastic in origin, dating to the 13th century or earlier. When the current hall was built around it in the 1500s, the tower was incorporated into the design, but given no particular function. It served at various times as storage, as a quiet retreat, as a library. My father sealed it in 1859, the year of my mother's death. He claimed the structure was unsafe, but he hesitated, choosing his words with care. I believe now that his reasons may have been other than architectural." The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the half-hour, 8:30, its silvery notes hanging in the air before fading into the sound of rain and fire. Outside, the January night pressed against the windows, offering nothing but its own darkness, its own wet mysteries. "And these 12 nights," Holmes continued, his voice maintaining that same soothing, unhurried quality, "has the light appeared at any other time? Has it varied in duration or intensity?" "Always at midnight precisely," Ashbourne confirmed. "It burns for approximately 13 minutes, then fades as though someone were slowly turning down a lamp. During those minutes, I confess I experience the most peculiar sensation, a feeling that something of great importance is attempting to communicate, that if I could only understand the language being spoken, mysteries of considerable significance would unfold. I found myself drawn into the narrative despite its strangeness, or perhaps because of it. There was something in Lord Ashbourne's manner that suggested absolute sincerity, a man reporting phenomena he could neither explain nor dismiss. Holmes, I noticed, had assumed the expression he wore when a problem of genuine interest presented itself, not the restless energy he brought to urgent cases, but a deeper, more contemplative engagement. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, turning to me with a slight smile, "I perceive that your medical practice can spare you for several days. The month is young, your patients are largely recovered from their holiday excesses, and Murray stands ready to attend to any urgent matters. Would you care for a journey to Northumberland? A few days in a Gothic pile overlooking the North Sea, investigating mysterious lights and family secrets? The prospect should perhaps have daunted me. The journey north in January, the inconvenience, the venture into unknown circumstances. Instead, I felt a familiar quickening of interest, that sense of stepping away from ordinary life into something richer, stranger, more alive with possibility. I should be delighted, I replied simply. Lord Ashburn's relief was palpable, his shoulders lowering from their tense elevation. You will come then, both of you. I cannot express what comfort this brings. I have felt quite alone with this mystery, uncertain whether to trust my own perceptions. We shall depart tomorrow morning, Holmes declared, rising to pace before the fire in that restless way he had when plans were forming. The train north leaves King's Cross at 10. That gives us time to make arrangements and gather what materials we might require. Lord Ashbourne, you will return ahead of us, prepare the household for our arrival. I shall leave tonight, on the late train, our visitor confirmed, also rising, new energy visible in his movements. There is a connection that will have me home by morning. I shall ensure rooms are prepared, and that you have access to any documents or areas you wish to examine. As Holmes showed our guest to the door, I moved to the window, looking out over Baker Street's wet pavements, the gas lamps creating pools of light in the darkness. A few figures moved through the rain, bent against the weather, each travelling toward warmth and shelter, toward their own mysteries and revelations. The city felt vast and intimate simultaneously, holding countless stories within its sprawling geography. Holmes returned to the fireside, a thoughtful expression upon his face. An intriguing problem, Watson. A light that burns where no light should be. A sealed tower, a tradition called the Revelation, and only 2 nights remaining before Twelfth night. The Church's celebration of the Epiphany, when the Magi's journey concluded in revelation and recognition. An auspicious name for a family mystery. Do you suspect something supernatural? I asked, knowing his views on such matters, but curious how he would frame them in this particular context. I suspect, he replied slowly, settling back into his chair, that we shall find explanations rooted in human action and natural law. But the question of what those explanations might be, what could produce such phenomena so precisely described, that, my dear fellow, is why we shall journey north. Not to dispel wonder, but to understand it. Not to dismiss Lord Ashbourne's experiences, but to illuminate them. We sat for some time longer, discussing what preparations might be necessary, what lines of inquiry to pursue, what resources to consult before departure. But as the hour grew later and the fire burned lower, our conversation drifted into comfortable silence once more. The prospect of the journey ahead added texture to the evening, a sense of anticipation, balanced with the present moment's tranquility. Eventually, I retired to my room, leaving Holmes to whatever nocturnal contemplations occupied him. As I prepared for sleep, I could hear him moving about the sitting room below, the creak of floorboards, the occasional note of his violin singing out a brief melodic fragment before falling silent again. The sounds were as familiar as my own heartbeat, markers of home and friendship, of life shared through countless cases and quiet evenings. Sleep came gently, accompanied by the rain's eternal whisper, carrying me into dreams where towers glowed with mysterious light, and ancient stones held secrets just beyond the reach of understanding. Morning arrived wrapped in pearl-grey clouds, the rain having paused, but the sky promising its eventual return. Baker Street stirred to life gradually. The milkman's cart, the knife grinder's bell, the gradual increase of pedestrian traffic as London's millions began their daily dance. Breakfast at 201B was a typically excellent production by Mrs. Hudson. Eggs perfectly coddled, toast at the precise degree of brownness, marmalade from Fortnum and Mason, and tea strong enough to chase away any lingering drowsiness. Holmes was already dressed for travel, his energy focused and purposeful. He had spent the early hours, he informed me, researching what information could be gleaned about Ashbourne Hall and the family's history. A small stack of reference volumes sat upon the table, bristling with marker papers, where he had noted passages of interest. The Ashbournes are an old family, he explained as we ate, with roots extending back to before the Norman conquest. They have served various monarchs with varying degrees of distinction, accumulating both wealth and a certain reputation for eccentricity. The hall itself has been extensively documented by architectural historians. It is considered one of the finest examples of Tudor construction incorporating earlier medieval elements. He passed me a book opened to an engraving of the hall, even in black and white, even rendered in the somewhat stilted style of architectural illustration. The place possessed undeniable presence. The main house spread across the image in the characteristic E-shape of Tudor design, with the eastern tower rising at one end like a watchtower or lighthouse, distinctly older in style, its stones darker, its windows narrower and deeper set. The tower, Holmes continued, tapping the image with one long finger, was originally part of a small monastery dedicated to St. Cuthbert, established in the late 1200s. When Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, the property passed into secular hands, eventually being purchased by the Ashbourne family. They built their manor house, incorporating the surviving monastic structures, of which the tower is the most substantial remnant. A place of prayer and contemplation, I mused, studying the illustration. Perhaps that explains some of its atmosphere. Perhaps, Holmes agreed, though his tone suggested he reserved judgment. What interests me more is this tradition of the revelation. I can find no documented reference to it in any published history of the family. It exists, if it exists at all, only in private family knowledge, passed down through some mechanism we have yet to discover. Mrs. Hudson arrived to clear our plates and present us with a basket packed for the journey. Sandwiches wrapped in brown paper, apples, a flask of tea, and several of her excellent seed cakes. She fussed over our coats and scarves with maternal concern, extracting promises that we would telegraph if our return was delayed, and that we would not catch our deaths in the northern cold. The cab ride to King's Cross carried us through streets still damp from the previous night's rain, the city wearing its grey weather like a familiar garment. The station, when we arrived, bustled with the organised chaos characteristic of railway travel. Porters shouting, whistles blowing, the great locomotives breathing steam and smoke like patient dragons, and everywhere the sound of footsteps and voices, the movement of humanity toward distant destinations. Our train stood waiting at Platform 7, the northbound express that would carry us first to York, then on to Newcastle, with a final connection to the small station nearest Ashbourne Hall. We secured a first-class compartment, settling our luggage and ourselves as the final passengers boarded and the station clock's hands approached the hour of departure. The whistle blew, a long, piercing note that cut through all other sound. The train jerked, settled, then began its smooth acceleration, pulling away from the platform with that peculiar gathering momentum that seems impossibly gradual at first, then suddenly irresistible. London began to slide past the windows, buildings and bridges, streets and churches, the endless accretion of human habitation, giving way gradually to suburbs, then to the green countryside beyond. Holmes settled into his corner seat, already absorbed in a monograph on medieval religious architecture he had brought along. I positioned myself opposite, watching the landscape transform outside our window, feeling the journey's rhythm establish itself in the clack and sway of wheels on rails, in the gentle rocking that seems designed to lull the mind into a state between waking and dreaming. The English countryside in January possesses a subtle beauty easily overlooked. The trees stood bare, their branches forming intricate patterns against the pale sky, each one a study in organic geometry. Fields stretched in shades of brown and grey-green, occasionally brightened by the unexpected presence of winter wheat or the dark shapes of livestock grazing. Villages appeared and disappeared, each centred on its church spire, each suggesting stories and lives unfolding at their own pace, indifferent to the train rushing past. At York, we changed trains, the platform crowded with travellers heading in all directions. Businessmen with their leather cases, families with impossible amounts of luggage, soldiers in uniform on leave, or reporting for duty. The endless variety of human purpose made visible in movement. We had an hour's wait, which we spent in the station's tea room, a high-ceilinged establishment filled with the pleasant clatter of china and conversation. Holmes used the time to telegraph Lord Ashbourne, confirming our expected arrival time. When he returned from the telegraph office, he brought news. Ashbourne has arranged for a carriage to meet us at the station. It is a drive of some 90 minutes to the hall, he says, through countryside he describes as possessing notable bleakness. I confess I look forward to it. The next leg of our journey carried us further north, the landscape growing gradually more rugged, more austere. The gentle rolling hills of Yorkshire gave way to harder, more dramatic terrain. Stone walls divided the fields, built without mortar in a tradition centuries old, following the natural contours of the land. Occasional farmhouses appeared, solid and square, built to withstand weather that came unimpeded from the North Sea. As afternoon faded toward evening, we reached Newcastle, that city of bridges and coal, of shipyards and steep streets rising from the Tyne. Our final train was smaller, a local service that stopped at every village and crossing, its pace leisurely, its few passengers possessed of the settled quiet of those near journey's end. Darkness had fallen completely by the time we reached our destination, a small station serving several scattered communities. A single gas lamp illuminated the platform, casting more shadow than light. The station master, an elderly man with magnificent side whiskers, greeted us with grave courtesy and directed us to where a carriage waited, its lamps glowing in the darkness. The driver, introduced as Thomas, was a man of perhaps 50 years, weathered by northern weather and northern reticence. He saw to our luggage with efficient silence, then handed us into the carriage with the grave formality of one performing a ritual of significance. The interior smelled of leather and damp wool, the seats worn to comfort by generations of use. We set off into a darkness so complete it seemed almost tangible. The carriage lamps threw moving pools of light ahead, revealing stone walls, bare hedgerows, the occasional sheep whose eyes caught and reflected the light in brief, eerie flashes. The road climbed gradually, and as it did, I became aware of a sound that had been absent in London. The wind, moving across open space, with nothing to impede or soften it, carrying with it the salt scent of the not-so-distant sea. Holmes sat quietly, his profile occasionally visible when we passed some source of light, his expression thoughtful. The journey's rhythm had settled over us both, that peculiar state of suspended time that long travel induces, where the destination exists as an abstract concept, and the present moment is defined entirely by motion and anticipation. "Tell me, Thomas," Holmes called to the driver, his voice raised to carry over the wind and wheels. "How long have you been in Lord Ashbourne's service?" 30 years, sir," came the reply, the accent thick with Northumberland's particular music. "Since I was a lad of 20. Worked under my father before that, who served the old lord." "Then you remember when the eastern tower was sealed?" A pause, filled only by the horse's steady clip-clop and the wind's whisper. "Aye, sir, that I do. A strange time that was. The old lord, he was never quite the same after the mistress passed, became fixed on certain ideas, certain fears, locked up the tower and wouldn't speak of why, not to anyone. And the lights that appear there now," Holmes pressed gently, "what do the household staff make of those?" Another pause, longer this time. When Thomas spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something that might have been unease, or might have been wonder. "We've all seen them, sir. Started on Christmas Eve, just as Lord Ashbourne told you. Cook says it's a blessing, a sign of grace. The maids won't go near that wing after dark. As for me, I've seen strange things in my time, working at the hall. That place has depths, sir. Layers and secrets, old as the stones themselves." We crested a rise, and suddenly the sea became visible, a vast darkness that somehow read as different from the darkness of land, more absolute, more ancient. The wind coming off it carried a wildness that made the carriage seem suddenly very small, very fragile, a tiny island of light and warmth moving through immensity. Then, ahead and above, I saw lights, windows glowing yellow in the distance, arranged in patterns that suggested the hall's substantial architecture. As we drew closer, the building began to resolve itself from the surrounding darkness. The main house spread low and wide, its Tudor gables and chimneys creating a distinctive silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. And at the eastern end, rising above the rest, the tower stood like a sentinel, its narrow windows dark and watchful. We pulled into a courtyard paved with ancient stones, drawing up before an entrance flanked by pillars that showed the weathering of centuries. The door opened immediately, spilling warm light, and the figure of Lord Ashbourne himself, descending the steps to greet us with obvious relief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, welcome to Ashbourne Hall. I trust the journey was not too taxing. Come in, come in. You must be thoroughly chilled. Mrs. Brennan has prepared rooms for you, and dinner awaits whenever you are ready." We followed him into an entrance hall of impressive proportions. The floor was flagstone, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. Oak panelling rose to wainscot height, above which plaster walls displayed the kind of subtle irregularity that speaks of genuine age. a magnificent staircase curved upward, its newel posts carved with heraldic beasts whose exact nature the dim light obscured. And dominating one wall, a clock of substantial size showed the time as approaching 8 o'clock, though which 8 o'clock, evening or morning, the darkness outside made momentarily ambiguous. "The great clock," Lord Ashbourne said, noticing my attention. "Built by John Harrison's nephew in 1773. It has kept perfect time for over a century, requiring winding only once weekly. By its measure, the eastern tower's light appears at midnight precisely." A woman of middle years appeared, Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper, I presumed, to show us to our rooms. We ascended the great staircase, passing portraits whose subjects watched our progress with the enigmatic gazes of the long dead, passing windows that showed only our own reflections against the outer darkness, passing doors behind which the house extended into chambers and passages I could only imagine. The rooms prepared for us were adjacent, comfortable in the way of country houses, furnished with solid pieces that had likely stood in those positions for generations. A fire burned in each grate, filling the spaces with dancing light and welcome warmth. Hot water had been provided for washing, and our luggage had somehow arrived ahead of us, already unpacked with practiced efficiency. I took a moment to approach the window, looking out over the grounds. The wind moved through unseen trees, their motion visible only in the shifting of shadows against shadows. Somewhere out there, the North Sea beat against ancient shores, eternal and indifferent. And somewhere, in this very building, a tower stood sealed and silent, waiting for midnight, waiting for its strange light to bloom once more. A soft knock at my door announced Holmes. He had changed from his travelling clothes, but retained that expression of focused interest, the case having fully captured his attention. "Shall we dine, Watson? I find I am curious to explore the hall, to understand its geography before tonight's vigil, for we shall keep watch, of course, to witness this phenomenon firsthand." Dinner was served in a dining room of moderate size, far more intimate than the grand hall that surely existed somewhere in the building's depths. Lord Ashbourne had clearly chosen this space deliberately, seeking to create an atmosphere of collegial investigation rather than formal entertainment. The meal itself was excellent. Roasted venison, root vegetables prepared with subtle herbs, and a wine that spoke of a cellar maintained with knowledge and care. As we ate, our host provided more details about the hall's history and the tower's peculiarities. "My father," he explained, his voice thoughtful, "was a man of science and reason, much like yourself, Mr. Holmes. He had no patience for superstition, or what he called ancestral nonsense. And yet, after my mother's death, he changed, became secretive, would spend hours in the tower, emerging with a troubled expression. Then, quite suddenly, he sealed it, ordered the door locked, and the key placed in his keeping. When I inherited, the key came to me with his personal effects, along with a sealed letter." Holmes set down his wineglass, his attention sharpening. "A letter. What did it contain?" "Instructions," Lord Ashbourne replied, though cryptic ones. "He wrote that I should keep the tower sealed until the 12th night following Christmas in the year of my 60th birthday. That year is now. Tomorrow night is 12th night. He wrote that I should be present in the hall, that I should witness the revelation with an open mind and a prepared heart, and that I should trust what is shown, for it is both gift and responsibility. "May I see this letter?" Holmes asked quietly. Lord Ashbourne withdrew a folded paper from his inner pocket, passing it across the table. Holmes examined it with that peculiar intensity he brought to documents, noting not just the content, but the paper quality, the ink, the handwriting's characteristics. After a long moment, he passed it to me. The hand was educated, but trembling slightly, suggesting either great age or strong emotion. The words were precisely as Lord Ashbourne had quoted, but seeing them written in that shaking script added a weight, a poignancy that mere recitation could not convey. This was a father writing to a son across the gulf of death, attempting to communicate something he clearly believed to be of profound importance. "Your father dated this letter," Holmes observed, "the day before his death. He knew his time was short, yet he did not choose to reveal this mystery directly, but rather to set conditions for its revelation. That suggests several possibilities. Either he believed you needed to reach a certain age to properly understand or appreciate what the tower contains, or the revelation itself is somehow tied to temporal factors, a specific configuration of dates that only recurs at long intervals." We adjourned to the library after dinner, a magnificent room whose walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, the accumulated learning of generations. A fire burned here too, and comfortable chairs invited long hours of reading and contemplation. The room smelled of leather and old paper, of wood smoke, and the indefinable scent that seems to emanate from ancient buildings, a combination of stone and time. Lord Ashbourne showed us various family documents, genealogies, property records, correspondence spanning centuries. Holmes examined them with patient thoroughness, occasionally making notes in the small book he carried for such purposes. I found myself drawn to the windows, looking out toward where I knew the eastern tower stood, though darkness rendered it invisible from this vantage point. The clock in the entrance hall began to chime. 10 strikes, the sound carrying through the house with solemn clarity. 2 hours remained until midnight, until the promised manifestation of light in the sealed tower. I felt anticipation building, that peculiar tightening that comes before revelation, before the moment when mystery begins its transformation toward understanding. "Gentlemen," Lord Ashbourne said, rising from his chair, "I suggest we position ourselves where we can observe the tower clearly. There is a corridor in the west wing, with windows that provide an unobstructed view. I have arranged for chairs to be placed there, and for tea to be available. We may have a long wait, and comfort aids patience." We followed him through the house's lamplit passages, our footsteps echoing on wooden floors, past more portraits, more closed doors, more hints of the building's vast complexity. The corridor he led us to was indeed perfectly situated, a long gallery with windows along one wall, facing directly toward the eastern tower. Chairs had been arranged before the central window, with a small table holding a tea service and the components necessary for maintaining the watch. Through the glass, the tower was now visible as a darker shape against the dark sky, its stones ancient and patient, its windows empty of light. We settled into our positions, and a peculiar quiet descended. Not silence, for old houses are never truly silent. The wind whispered around stone walls and through bare trees. The building itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with changes in temperature, old wood creaking, old stones settling. Somewhere distant, a pipe clanked softly. These sounds, rather than disturbing the peace, deepened it creating a soundscape that was somehow soothing, meditative. Holmes sat very still, his eyes fixed on the tower, his mind clearly engaged in that state of focused waiting he had perfected. Lord Ashbourne occupied a similar posture, though his stillness seemed to cost him more effort, tension visible in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands gripped the chair's arms. I found myself drifting into a contemplative state, my thoughts moving like clouds across an internal sky. The journey, the dinner, the accumulated details of the case all swirled together, forming patterns that almost made sense, that suggested connections just beyond the reach of conscious understanding. The warm tea, the comfortable chair, the darkness beyond the windows, all conspired to create a sense of suspension, of existing between moments, between states. The clock in the distant entrance hall chimed 11. The sound seemed to come from very far away, from another world entirely. 1 hour remained. The tower stood unchanged, its windows dark, offering no hint of what the next hour might reveal. Lord Ashbourne poured fresh tea, the sound intimate in the quiet corridor. "I confess," he murmured, "that part of me hopes nothing will occur tonight, that my observations of the past 12 nights have been some form of elaborate self-deception, and yet another part desperately wishes for the light to appear, for proof that I have not been imagining what I have seen. Either outcome will provide valuable information," Holmes replied gently. "If the light appears, we observe and analyze. If it does not, we must ask why the pattern has broken, what factors have changed. There is no scenario in which we fail to advance our understanding." Time stretched, elastic and strange. Minutes felt like hours, yet hours felt like moments. The darkness beyond the windows seemed to deepen, to become more absolute, as though the world had contracted to just this corridor, just this watch, just these 3 men waiting for revelation or for emptiness. The clock began to chime midnight. As the 12th stroke sounded, a light bloomed in the tower's highest window. It was exactly as Lord Ashbourne had described, not the steady glow of lamp or candle, but something that seemed to pulse, to breathe, to move within itself. The colour defied easy description. Blue, yes, but a blue that suggested moonlight through deep water, silver edged with violet, luminescence rather than mere light. We all 3 rose from our chairs, drawn to the window as though pulled by invisible threads. The light strengthened, filling the tower window completely, then seeming to overflow it, creating a nimbus that haloed the entire structure. In that strange illumination, I could see details of the tower's stonework that had been invisible in ordinary light, carvings around the windows, patterns in the masonry that suggested deliberate arrangement, the ghost of what might have been religious inscriptions. "Extraordinary," Holmes breathed, his usual composure fractured by genuine wonder. "Watson, note the rhythm of the pulsation, approximately 3 cycles per minute, regular as heartbeat, yet clearly not produced by any standard illumination method I am familiar with." The light continued its strange dance, and as I watched, I began to perceive something even more unusual. The luminescence seemed to carry a quality beyond mere visual stimulus. Looking at it produced a sensation somewhere between hearing very distant music and remembering a scent from childhood, something that engaged senses beyond sight, that created a response more emotional than rational. "Do you feel it?" Lord Ashbourne whispered, his voice carrying awe. "That sense of communication, as though something is attempting to reach across distance, across time itself. Holmes did not answer immediately, his attention wholly absorbed by the phenomenon. When he spoke, his voice was soft, thoughtful. I feel something, certainly. Whether it is truly emanating from the light, or is rather a psychological response to unusual visual stimulation, I cannot yet determine. But I acknowledge the sensation. It is not unpleasant. We stood transfixed, watching the light perform its mysterious dance. The minutes passed, marked by the clock's patient tick in the distance, marked by our own breathing, marked by the eternal wind outside. And then, as gradually as it had appeared, the light began to fade. The diminishment was not abrupt, not like an extinguished candle, but rather like dawn retreating before renewed night. Impossible, yet happening before our eyes. The blue-silver luminescence withdrew, contracted, condensed itself down to a single point of brilliance, then disappeared entirely, leaving the tower window as dark as it had been before. We stood for a long moment in silence, the after-image still dancing in our vision, the sense of something profound having occurred still resonating in the space around us. Lord Ashbourne's face bore an expression of vindication, mingled with deeper wonder. Whatever he had witnessed alone for 12 nights, he had now shared, and the sharing seemed to bring its own relief. 13 minutes, Holmes announced, consulting his pocket watch. From the first appearance to complete fading, 13 minutes precisely. Watson, did you note anything else? Any detail, however small? I considered, replaying the experience in memory. The light seemed somehow to move within itself, I offered slowly. Not flickering as flame does, but rather like something living, breathing, turning in sleep, perhaps. Yes, Lord Ashbourne agreed eagerly. Yes, exactly that. And did you both feel that peculiar sensation? That sense of presence, of communication? Holmes was already pacing, his energy finding expression after the stillness of watching. We have now observed the phenomenon directly. Whatever produces that light is real, physical, subject to investigation and understanding. The regularity of its appearance, the precise timing, the consistent duration, suggests a mechanism of some kind, something set in motion deliberately. The question before us now is clear. What lies within that sealed tower? What mechanism or arrangement produces this effect? Then you wish to open it? Lord Ashbourne asked, something in his voice suggesting both eagerness and trepidation. Tomorrow is 12th night, Holmes replied, pausing in his pacing to face our host directly. Your father's letter specified that you should witness the revelation on that night specifically. I propose we respect his wishes. We observe again tomorrow evening, and if the phenomenon repeats, as I suspect it shall, we open the tower afterward. The mystery has waited 30 years. It can wait one more day, and we shall spend that day gathering information, examining the tower's exterior, preparing ourselves for whatever we might find. This eminently sensible proposal seemed to satisfy Lord Ashbourne. We parted for the night, each retreating to our rooms, though I suspected none of us would find sleep easily. My mind replayed the light's appearance again and again, searching for meaning in its movements, in its strange colour, in the sensation it had produced. I stood at my chamber window for some time, looking out over the dark grounds toward where I knew the tower stood. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the salt scent of the sea, the promise of storm. Above, clouds moved across a sliver of moon, their motion hypnotic, eternal. Finally, I prepared for bed, settling between cool sheets, the fire in my grate burning down to embers. The house creaked and whispered around me, not threatening, but companionable, as though welcoming me into its long existence. Sleep came eventually, carrying me into dreams where towers glowed with impossible light, and ancient stones spoke in languages just beyond comprehension. Morning arrived grey and windswept, the North Sea visible from my window as a vast expanse of steel-coloured water, white waves breaking against dark rocks. The grounds of Ashbourne Hall spread around the building in careful cultivation, gradually yielding to wilder terrain. Formal gardens nearest the house, then orchards and pasture land, then the windswept heath that extended to the sea cliffs. Breakfast was served in a cheerful morning room with windows facing south, capturing what little light the cloudy day provided. Lord Ashbourne appeared remarkably refreshed, the previous night's confirmation of his observations having apparently lifted a burden from his shoulders. Holmes was already dressed for outdoor investigation, clearly eager to examine the tower's exterior in daylight. "I took the liberty," our host announced, "of asking Mrs. Brennan to prepare a basket of lunch. I thought you might wish to spend the day exploring the grounds and examining the tower from outside. The weather is not pleasant, but it is typical for this time of year, and the walking, though bracing, is quite manageable." Thus provisioned and wrapped in warm coats borrowed from the hall's extensive stores, Holmes and I set out to circumnavigate the property. Lord Ashbourne remained behind, citing estate business that required attention, though I suspected he also wished to give us freedom to investigate without the constraint of his presence. The wind that had been merely audible the previous night now made itself felt, pushing against us as we walked, carrying the sea's voice inland. The grass bent before it, and the bare trees gestured wildly, their branches tracing patterns against the moving clouds. Despite the cold, there was something exhilarating about being out in such weather, something that drove the cobwebs from mind and body. We approached the eastern tower from multiple angles, Holmes examining it with that peculiar intensity he brought to physical evidence. The structure was indeed ancient, its stones weathered by centuries of northern weather, its mortar thick with lichen. The windows were narrow, designed more for defence or for the admission of measured light than for panoramic views. "Observe, Watson," Holmes called over the wind, pointing upward to where the tower rose above the main house. The tower predates the Tudor construction by perhaps 3 centuries. See how the stones are set differently, how the architectural style speaks of an entirely different era and purpose. This was never meant to be a comfortable domestic space. It was built for contemplation, for isolation, for purposes we might categorize as spiritual. We circled the structure completely, finding it attached to the main house at only one point, a corridor that must lead to the sealed door Lord Ashbourne had mentioned. Otherwise, it stood somewhat apart, a medieval remnant incorporated into, but never fully integrated with the later building. "There," Holmes said suddenly, stopping at a point on the eastern face. "Do you see, Watson? Marks in the stone, worn almost smooth, but still visible. A pattern, carved deliberately." I looked where he indicated, and could indeed make out traces of what might have been carving. Curved lines, possibly letters in a script I did not recognize, possibly abstract designs. Time and weather had reduced them to suggestion, to the mere ghost of intentional marking. "Old," Holmes murmured, running his fingers over the weathered stone. "Very old." predating even the tower's construction, I think. These stones were taken from some earlier structure, possibly Roman, possibly even older. The Northumberland coast has been occupied since time immemorial, each culture building upon the ruins of what came before. We continued our investigation, noting every detail, every peculiarity of construction. Holmes took measurements, made sketches in his notebook, collected samples of the lichen and mortar for later examination. Though what he hoped to learn from such analysis, I could not guess. By midday, we had completed our circuit of the tower and had moved on to exploring the wider grounds. We ate our lunch in the shelter of a small stone folly, positioned on a rise, overlooking both the hall and the sea beyond. The basket Mrs. Brennan had prepared proved excellent. Sandwiches of cold roasted beef, hard-boiled eggs, cheese, apples, and the same seed cake we had enjoyed in London, which transported well and tasted of home. "What do you make of it all, Holmes?" I asked, pouring tea from the thermos flask that had accompanied our meal. The light, the tower, Lord Ashbourne's father's mysterious instructions. Holmes accepted the tea with a nod of thanks, his eyes distant, processing the accumulated data. "I make several observations," he began slowly. "First, the tower clearly has significance beyond its architectural interest. Second, something within it has been carefully arranged to produce the light we witnessed. Third, Lord Ashbourne's father went to elaborate lengths to ensure his son would be present for some specific revelation tied to Twelfth Night in a particular year. Fourth, whatever this revelation is, the father believed it required maturity and context to appreciate, hence the delay until his son's 60th year." He paused, sipping the tea, his gaze moving from the hall to the sea and back. "What I cannot yet determine is whether we are dealing with a purely mechanical phenomenon, some clever arrangement of lenses and phosphorescent materials, perhaps triggered by clockwork, or whether there is some other factor involved." That sensation we all felt, that sense of presence. It suggests something beyond mere mechanism, though I am reluctant to leap to supernatural conclusions. Could it be optical? I suggested. Some natural phenomenon that appears at this time of year, at this latitude, that the tower's position and windows somehow frame or concentrate. "A reasonable hypothesis," Holmes acknowledged, "though the regularity of timing, midnight precisely, 13 minutes exactly, argues against natural occurrence. Nature rarely maintains such precision. No, Watson, I believe we shall find that human agency lies at the heart of this mystery, though what form that agency takes remains to be seen." The afternoon wore on, spent in continued exploration, and in the gathering of information from the small library of local history books Lord Ashbourne had assembled for our use. We learned that the area had indeed been continuously occupied since before Roman times. St. Cuthbert himself had apparently spent time at the monastery that once stood on this site, seeking solitude and spiritual communion. Various local legends spoke of lights seen over the sea, of mysterious sounds heard in the stones, of places where the boundary between the mundane and the numinous grew thin. Dinner that evening carried a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow night, or rather, tonight, as it was now Twelfth Night Eve, would be the culmination of whatever mystery we had been drawn into. Lord Ashbourne spoke little, his mind clearly occupied with thoughts of his father, with the approaching revelation, with questions that had accumulated over 30 years of wondering what lay sealed behind a locked door. "Your father," Holmes asked gently over dessert. "Did he speak of the tower during your childhood? Did you have any sense of its significance before he sealed it?" Lord Ashbourne set down his spoon, his expression distant with memory. "I recall it as a place of books," he said slowly. "My father used it as a private library, a retreat where he could read undisturbed. Sometimes he would take me there, show me old volumes, speak of history and family. It was a place of warmth in my memory, of sunlight through narrow windows, of my father's voice reading aloud from ancient texts. Whatever changed after my mother's death, whatever drove him to seal the tower, it transformed a space of light into one of shadow in my mind. I have spent 30 years wondering what happened there, what he discovered or experienced that altered everything. We retired early, each of us seeking whatever rest could be found before the night's vigil. I lay in my bed, listening to the wind outside, to the house's nighttime voices, to my own thoughts circling the mystery. Sleep came eventually, though fitfully, my dreams populated by glowing towers and unopened doors, by the sense of standing on the threshold of revelation. Midnight found us once again in the West Wing corridor, positioned before the windows, tea growing cold in our cups as we watched the eastern tower stand dark and silent against the cloudy night. The wind had intensified, rattling the windows, making the building groan softly, a living thing responding to the elements. As before, the entrance hall clock began its midnight chime. As before, on the 12th stroke, light bloomed in the tower's highest window. But tonight, 12th night proper, something was different. The light appeared as it had the night before, pulsing with that strange blue-silver luminescence, breathing with its otherworldly rhythm. But as we watched, it began to change. The pulsation quickened, the colour deepened, shifting through shades that seemed to exist outside normal spectrum. And then, quite clearly, quite unmistakably, the light began to form shapes. Not random patterns, not the play of luminescence against stone, but deliberate forms, geometric at first, circles, triangles, more complex configurations that seemed to hold meaning just beyond my grasp. Then, as the minutes passed, the shapes evolved, became more elaborate, more intricate. "My God," Lord Ashbourne whispered, his face pressed close to the window glass. "It's writing. The light is forming letters, words." He was right. As I watched, squinting against the strange glow, I could make out characters taking shape, holding briefly, then dissolving into new formations. The script was ancient, nothing I recognized, but unmistakably intentional, unmistakably language. Holmes had produced a notebook and was sketching frantically, attempting to capture the forms before they changed. His hand moved with desperate speed, his usual perfect control shaken by the need to record something that would not stay still, that transformed even as he watched. The 13 minutes stretched into eternity and passed in an instant. The light performed its elaborate dance, the letters and symbols forming and reforming, telling some story we could not yet read, conveying some message we did not yet understand. And then, as the clock in the distance marked the 13th minute, the light condensed, collapsed into itself, and vanished, leaving us in darkness relieved only by the corridor's dim gas lamps. For a long moment, none of us moved. The magnitude of what we had witnessed seemed to require stillness, silence, time for integration. Then Lord Ashbourne spoke, his voice carrying wonder and determination in equal measure. "We must open the tower. Tonight. Now. Whatever my father wanted me to see, whatever revelation awaits, I can wait no longer. Holmes looked up from his notebook, his eyes bright with the excitement of imminent discovery. Yes, he agreed simply. Yes, it is time. Lord Ashbourne left to retrieve the key, and Holmes turned to me, his expression serious. Watson, we are about to step into unknown territory. I cannot predict what we shall find in that sealed tower. I ask you to observe carefully, to remain calm regardless of what we encounter, and to remember that you are here as both witness and friend. Where you go, I follow, I replied simply, the formula we had established across countless cases, countless adventures. Whatever waits, we face it together. Lord Ashbourne returned, carrying not just the key, but also several lamps and a candelabra. The tower has been without light for 30 years, he explained. We shall need to provide our own. We processed through the house like some strange nocturnal ceremony. 3 men carrying lights, moving through sleeping corridors toward a door that had been sealed for a generation. The key felt heavy when Lord Ashbourne placed it in my hand to hold while he arranged the lamps. Solid iron wrought in an old style, its weight speaking of age and significance. The door, when we reached it, was heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands set deep into the stone wall. Lord Ashbourne took the key back, his hand trembling slightly as he inserted it into the lock. For a moment, I thought the mechanism might have seized, that rust and time might prevent the opening. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the lock turned. The door swung inward on hinges that, despite the years, moved with surprising ease, as though they had been waiting, ready for this exact moment. Beyond lay darkness absolute, a blackness that seemed to have accumulated density over the decades, that had waited undisturbed by light or air since the day of sealing. Holmes raised his lamp, and the light pushed back the darkness, revealing a spiral staircase winding upward into the tower's height. The stone steps were worn in the centre from generations of feet, curving away into shadow that retreated as we climbed. The ascent was not long, perhaps 40 steps, but each one felt weighted with significance, with the sense of moving not just upward, but forward, toward revelation, toward understanding. Our footsteps echoed on the stone, and our shadows danced on the curved walls, made vast and strange by the moving lamplight. At the top, another door, this one unlocked, opening easily to reveal the tower's upper chamber. The room was circular, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, with the narrow windows we had observed from outside set at intervals around the circumference. But what dominated the space, what drew every eye immediately upon entering, was the apparatus at the chamber's centre. It was unlike anything I had seen before, a construction of brass and crystal, of lenses and mirrors, of mechanisms so intricate they seemed more like the work of a jeweller than an engineer. At its heart sat a sphere of clear crystal, perhaps 8 inches in diameter, suspended in a framework of concentric rings that could apparently rotate independently on multiple axes. Around this central arrangement, other components spread outward, more lenses, positioned at specific angles, curved mirrors of polished silver, prisms of perfect clarity, and clockwork mechanisms of exquisite complexity. The whole assembly rested on a circular table of dark wood, around whose edge ran carved symbols, the same ancient letters we had seen forming in the light, rendered here in permanent wood. Extraordinary, Holmes breathed, moving closer with his lamp raised. This is no simple magic lantern, no mere optical trick. This is a device of profound sophistication, purpose-built to produce the phenomenon we witnessed. Lord Ashburn approached the table with something approaching reverence, his fingers hovering above the carved symbols without quite touching them. "My father built this," he murmured, "or perhaps found it and restored it. All those hours he spent up here before my mother's death. This is what occupied him. But why? What purpose does it serve?" Holmes was examining the mechanism from all angles, his detective's eye noting every detail. "The central crystal," he observed, "appears to be naturally luminescent. See how it glows very faintly, even without activation. Some mineral property, perhaps, or some quality we do not yet understand. The surrounding apparatus, lenses, mirrors, the rotating rings, all serve to focus, amplify, and direct that natural luminescence, transforming it into the light show we witnessed from outside." "But the timing," I interjected. "How does it activate precisely at midnight? How does it know to form those shapes, those letters?" "The clockwork here," Holmes indicated a complex mechanism connected to the base of the apparatus, "is clearly the timing mechanism. But as for the shapes—" He trailed off, peering more closely at the rotating rings. "Yes, here. The rings are inscribed with patterns, and as they rotate through the light path, they create shadow and illumination in specific configurations. It is similar to a camera obscura in principle, but far more sophisticated in execution." Lord Ashbourne had moved to one of the room's windows, and now called out in a voice tight with emotion, "Gentlemen, please, look at this." We joined him at the window, the same window through which we had seen the light appear. On the deep stone sill lay a book, leather-bound, clearly old but well preserved. Lord Ashbourne lifted it with careful hands, opening it to reveal pages covered in the same hand we had seen in his father's letter, though steadier, written over the course of years, rather than in a final rush. "It is a journal," he said softly, "my father's journal. Listen." He began to read aloud. "I have made a discovery that transforms everything I believed about my family, about this place, about the nature of reality itself. The Eastern Tower, which I had thought merely an ancient remnant of monastic architecture, contains within it a device of staggering sophistication and equally staggering age. I cannot determine precisely when it was built, but linguistic evidence suggests the symbols are pre-Roman, possibly dating to the Celtic Druids, possibly even earlier. The device is, in essence, a calendar and a teacher. It activates on specific dates, the 12 nights of Christmas, culminating in Twelfth night, and displays information encoded in its very structure. I have spent months deciphering the symbols, cross-referencing them with linguistic texts, consulting with scholars of ancient languages. What I have learned suggests that this place, this site where the tower stands, has been sacred ground for millennia, a place where the ancients believed the boundaries between worlds grew thin, where knowledge could be received from sources beyond normal human access. The device was designed to preserve and transmit that knowledge across generations. Each year, for those who know to watch, it performs its display, encoding information in light and symbol. I have only begun to understand the depths of what is being communicated, but what I have grasped speaks of astronomical observations, of mathematical principles, of philosophical insights that predate their supposed historical discoveries by centuries. More troubling, more wondrous, I have come to believe that the central crystal is not merely luminescent through natural properties, but rather serves as a kind of receiver, transducer. The words available to me feel inadequate. It appears to respond to something, some force or emanation that intensifies during the 12 nights, particularly on 12th night itself, as though the turning of the year creates conditions that allow this reception to occur. I fear this knowledge is both gift and burden. I am not wise enough, not spiritually prepared enough to be its sole guardian. And yet, having discovered it, I cannot simply seal it away and pretend it does not exist. Thus, I have formed a plan. Lord Ashbourne paused, his voice having grown thick with emotion. He cleared his throat and continued, "I will seal the tower, protecting the device from casual discovery, from those who might seek to exploit or destroy what they cannot understand. But I will leave instructions for my son, timed to reach him when he has attained the age and experience necessary to appreciate what is here." On the 12th night, following Christmas, in the year of his 60th birthday, the device will perform its fullest display, the accumulated wisdom of millennia encoded in light and symbol. He will witness it, he will find this journal, and he will decide what is to be done with this knowledge going forward. To my son, when you read this, I have loved you more than words can express. I have tried to prepare you for this moment through example, if not through explicit instruction. Trust what you see. Question what you think you know. The universe is deeper, stranger, more miraculous than our daily lives suggest. This device, this place, this tradition maintained across countless generations. These are evidence that our ancestors understood things we have forgotten, saw connections we have ceased to recognize. The responsibility now passes to you. Use it wisely, use it well, and know that in discovering this, you carry forward a chain of knowledge that stretches back to the very dawn of human consciousness, and forward into futures we can barely imagine. The journal entry ended there. Lord Ashbourne closed the book gently, and for a long moment we stood in silence, the weight of centuries pressing down upon us, the implications of what we had learned spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. Holmes was the first to speak. A device for preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations, he said slowly, his voice carrying wonder. Built by people we would call primitive, yet demonstrating understanding of optics, mechanics, astronomy, and linguistics far beyond what we credit to ancient peoples. It suggests... He paused, choosing his words with care. It suggests that human development has not been the steady upward progression we imagine. That knowledge has been gained and lost and gained again. That our ancestors may have understood things we have only recently rediscovered, or have yet to rediscover. But the crystal, I interjected, this idea of it receiving something, of responding to conditions that intensify during certain times of the year. What could that mean? Holmes turned to examine the crystal more closely, his lamp held near. In its depths, faint luminescence swirled, like light moving through water, like something alive and aware. I do not know, Watson. There are forces we have names for. Magnetism, electricity, radiation, and doubtless forces we have yet to identify or understand. Perhaps the ancients, through observation and experimentation, identified some such force that our modern science has overlooked or dismissed. Or, perhaps, he paused, seemed to consider whether to continue. Or perhaps consciousness itself is more than we suppose. Perhaps awareness, focused and trained, can perceive and interact with aspects of reality that our materialist assumptions exclude. Lord Ashbourne had moved to the table and was running his hands along the carved symbols, his expression one of profound contemplation. "My father writes of responsibility," he said softly, "of knowledge being both gift and burden. What am I to do with this? Keep it sealed? Reveal it to the world? How does one make such a decision?" "Not tonight," Holmes replied gently. "Tonight we have made an extraordinary discovery. We have witnessed something remarkable, learned something that expands our understanding of history and human capability. That is sufficient for one evening. Tomorrow, in daylight, with rested minds, we can consider implications and decisions. For now, I suggest we descend, secure the tower once more, and allow ourselves time to process what we have learned." This eminently sensible suggestion was accepted. We made our way down the spiral stairs, our lamps casting dancing shadows, our minds full to overflowing with wonder and questions. Lord Ashbourne locked the door behind us, and we returned to the inhabited portions of the house, to warmth and light and the comforting normalcy of tea and quiet conversation. We sat long into the night in the library, not speaking of the mystery, but rather of ordinary things. Books we had read, places we had travelled, memories of people we had known. It was a way of grounding ourselves, of reconnecting with the everyday world, after venturing into territory that felt somehow outside normal time and space. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us, and we retired to our respective rooms. I lay in bed, watching firelight dance on the ceiling, my mind still circling the evening's revelations. The device in the tower, built by hands long turned to dust, maintained and understood by a chain of knowledge keepers stretching back beyond history into legend. The light we had witnessed, encoded with information preserved across millennia. The sense of standing at the intersection of past and future, holding in trust something profound and strange. Sleep came finally, deep and dreamless, the sleep of one who has witnessed wonders and whose mind requires rest to integrate them into understanding. Morning brought clarity, both literal and metaphorical. The clouds had cleared overnight, and brilliant winter sun flooded across the landscape, transforming the North Sea from grey to blue, making the frost-covered grounds sparkle as though scattered with diamonds. I woke feeling refreshed, the previous night's events having settled in memory as solid fact rather than dream. Remarkable but real, mysterious but no longer frightening. Breakfast was a cheerful affair. Lord Ashbourne appeared lighter, as though the revelation of the tower's secret, the reading of his father's journal, had lifted the weight of 30 years' wondering. We discussed, in gentle voices over eggs and toast, what might be done going forward. "I think," Lord Ashbourne said slowly, "that I shall follow my father's example. I will maintain the tower, preserve the device, study what knowledge I can extract from its displays. But I will not broadcast its existence to the world, not from desire to hoard knowledge, but from recognition that some things require context, require preparation, require a level of understanding that cannot be forced or rushed. Those who need to know will find their way to knowing, as you gentlemen found your way here." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "A wise approach. I would add only that you might consider documenting what you learn, as your father did, creating a record that can guide whoever comes after you, maintaining that chain of knowledge, keeping that has apparently persisted for thousands of years." "I shall," Lord Ashbourne agreed, and I would ask, if I may, whether you gentlemen might consent to serving as occasional consultants, additional minds examining the symbols, helping to decode what is being communicated. I suspect this will be the work of years, possibly decades, and I would value both your intellect, Mr. Holmes, and your grounding perspective, Dr. Watson. We both agreed readily, the prospect of ongoing engagement with such a mystery being far more appealing than simply walking away. Case closed, mystery solved. This was not a mystery to be solved in the conventional sense, but rather one to be lived with, learned from, gradually understood across time. We spent the day in relaxed exploration of the hall and grounds, now viewed through the lens of what we had learned. The place took on new dimensions, not just a family estate, but a repository of ancient wisdom, a sacred site maintained across millennia, a point where past and future met in the eternal present. In the afternoon, Holmes and I walked once more to the Eastern Tower, examining it now with understanding of what it contained. The weathered stones, the narrow windows, the very positioning of the structure took on new meaning. This had been built not primarily as fortress or retreat, but as an observatory, a temple to knowledge, a place where understanding could be sought, and sometimes, miraculously, found. We live in an age that prides itself on reason, on scientific understanding. Holmes mused as we stood looking up at the tower, and rightly so. The advances of recent decades have been remarkable, but perhaps we have been too quick to dismiss the wisdom of earlier ages, too ready to assume that our ancestors were ignorant savages, that progress means leaving behind all that came before. This device suggests otherwise. It suggests that knowledge is more cyclical than linear, that each age has its insights and its blind spots, and that true wisdom lies in being open to learning from all sources, ancient and modern alike. We returned to London the following day, the journey south feeling somehow like a return from distant lands, rather than merely from Northumberland. The city received us with its usual chaos and comfort, noise and crowds, smoke and rain, the endless human industry of the metropolis. Yet I found myself changed by the experience, expanded in some way that was difficult to articulate. The mystery of the 12th night light had been resolved in one sense. We understood the mechanism, the history, the purpose. Yet, in another sense, the mystery had deepened, opening onto questions far larger than the original puzzle of lights in a sealed tower. Weeks passed, flowing into months. Spring came to London, bringing blossoms and longer days, the renewal that follows winter's rest. Holmes engaged with his usual variety of cases, some trivial, some serious, each approached with his characteristic blend of reason and intuition. Yet, I noticed a subtle shift in his manner, a willingness to entertain possibilities he might previously have dismissed, a recognition that the universe held more mystery than any single system of thought could encompass. Letters arrived periodically from Lord Ashbourne, detailing his ongoing study of the device, his slow progress in decoding the symbols, his experiences of witnessing the light's display during the subsequent Christmas season. He wrote of finding peace in the work, of feeling connected to his father across the divide of death, of gratitude for the burden and gift of knowledge-keeping. One evening in late April, as Holmes and I sat in our familiar chairs with the windows open to admit spring's soft air, he suddenly spoke. "The 12th night case, Watson. You will write it up for your collection?" I considered. I had thought to, yes, though I confess I am uncertain how to render it. The strangeness of it, the implications. Write it as it happened, Holmes suggested. Render the facts truthfully, the atmosphere carefully, the wonder honestly. Let readers make of it what they will. Some will dismiss it as fancy. Others will recognize in it something true, something that resonates with their own sense that the world is deeper than it appears. And perhaps, in some distant time, someone will read your account and find in it the beginning of their own journey toward understanding mysteries we cannot yet imagine. So, I have written it, this account of our journey to Northumberland, of the light in the sealed tower, of the device that preserves knowledge across millennia, of the recognition that our ancestors' wisdom deserves our respect and attention. I have rendered it as accurately as memory and craft allow, hoping that in the reading, others might find some echo of the wonder we experienced, some invitation to approach their own lives with openness to mystery. The great clock in the entrance hall of Ashbourne Hall continues its patient measure of time's passage. The device in the Eastern Tower continues its annual display, encoding information for those who know to watch, maintaining a tradition older than nations, older than written history, a chain of knowledge extending backward into the mists of time and forward into futures we can barely glimpse. And somewhere, perhaps, in towers and chambers we have yet to discover, in landscapes we have yet to explore, other such devices wait in silence, holding other knowledge, dreaming other dreams, ready to reveal themselves when the time is right, when the student is prepared, when the questions become urgent enough to compel the search for answers. The universe is vast, strange, and generous, with its secrets to those who approach with open minds and patient hearts. This is what the 12th Night Mystery taught me, and it is a lesson I carry forward into whatever days and discoveries await. The fire has burned low now, dear listener, and the hour grows late. Our story has reached its natural conclusion, mystery transformed into understanding, questions answered, yet opening onto deeper questions still. The northern tower with its ancient light has become part of your dreams now, as it became part of mine, a reminder that wonder waits in unexpected places, that knowledge is preserved by those who recognize its value, that each generation receives gifts from the past and holds them in trust for the future. Let the tale settle over you like a comfortable blanket. Let its images drift through your mind as you release the day's tensions and demands. The wind in the trees, the light in the tower, the patient stones holding their secrets, the turning of seasons and years, the eternal rhythm of mystery and revelation. All these things continue whether we wake or sleep, whether we observe or dream. Your journey through this story has been a gift to me, the sharing of it a privilege I do not take lightly. If these words have brought you peace, if they have eased your path toward rest, if they have opened some small window in your imagination through which wonder might enter, then they have served their purpose well. Before you drift completely into sleep's welcoming embrace, might I ask a small favor? If this story has brought you comfort, if you have found value in this quiet hour we have shared, consider subscribing to this channel, leaving a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments. Such small gestures help others find these stories, help create a community of those who value quiet contemplation, who seek rest through narrative, who understand that mysteries need not be frightening to be engaging. But whether you choose to engage in those ways, or simply to drift into dreams, know that you are welcomed here, that these stories exist for you, that in this small corner of the digital world, there is always a fireside waiting, always a tale to be told, always a voice to guide you gently toward rest. And so, dear traveller, I bid you good night. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with glowing towers and ancient wisdom, with the comfort of mysteries gently resolved, with the knowledge that the universe holds wonders beyond counting, and that you are part of that wonder, connected to all that came before and all that will come after. Sleep well, sleep deep. Tomorrow will bring its own adventures, its own discoveries, its own quiet miracles. But for now, there is only rest, only peace, only the gentle descent into sleep's renewing darkness. Good night.